Another important rule to understand is that if you design a super wide roadway, you're going to get faster speeds. So if you narrow the roadway, they're going to go slower. So if your speed limit is 55 and you have an absurdly wide street, people are going to drive way faster than the speed limit. So the wider the roadway, the faster the speed, and you're going to get a lot more accidents if you're trying to create pedestrianization. It's also important to understand that intersections are these points of activity. So you need to think about, especially on your primary axis, you need to think about exactly what goes on at those intersections, right? So they need to make them active kind of commuter nodes and give intersections key things to do, especially along streets with high hierarchies. But also, you have to take into account you have to take into account lanes and alleys because these things are how people get services. So these smaller scale service outlets and routes that trucks, deliveries, and those type of things can occur, they need to be thought out as well. As I said earlier, and this is the third rule, so we want to give people destinations, points of interest. So the third rule, locate services within a 5-minute walking distance. Okay, so like I said, 5 minutes apart is typically the maximum you want to go to get to a specific destination. It's not that everyone's going to go to that destination per se, but at least there's kind of landmarks along the way as well. So it actually helps with kind of maneuvering through the city as well. If you want to support bus use, you need at least 10 dwelling units per acre to support bus use. Okay, so you look at this kind of layout here. It gives you spatially a reference to there's 4 to 10 dwelling units per acre for single family homes. So basically, what you do is you see 6, and townhomes can get you more. Apartments can get you even more. So whatever housing you're going to if you're going to have a bus route coming through, you're going to need higher density areas where that bus route is. Also, think about this. You're going to be laying out green space designs, or green space networks, and in some cases, you want to connect them. So think about the street as a linear park. Okay, design the street as a hydrological and recreational facility, not just an automotive transportation facility. Okay, it can be multifunctional. So think about it as a design corridor connecting spaces, not just a place for people to drive. Um, so if you put these things 5 minutes apart, right, you're creating chains of trips, right? So if you look at this cool kind of infographic here, these are different social hubs in Paris. You can see how close, and they're arranged around the street. So it's kind of interesting to see how these different hubs are all very close together. And this is the way you should be thinking for these kind of urban design setups. And so, as I said earlier, you know, if you're going to go 10 is the minimum dwelling units per acre, but the higher density you can get, and I'm not saying the density needs to be, it needs to be relative to where you're working, right? You don't want to put a 35-story building in an area with nothing but single family homes, but the higher the density, the more likely the transit is going to be used, and where the transit connects to. Those are the kind of the things you need to think about. And the more people you can get on transit, the more people you can get walking. I mean, those using alternative means of transportation, the less climate impact you're going to have. Also, a lot of these places may have old buildings, so like big box developments, old abandoned malls, those kind of things. You can retrofit these old buildings into new community centers. So, just because there's a building there, especially if it's abandoned, doesn't mean you can't reuse the building and adaptively reuse it into some sort of function that is needed. Retrofit the building, right? A good example here in Denver, where they took an old abandoned mall and they created kind of this downtown atmosphere, breaking it apart and retrofitting the structure. So just like you need chains of points of activity, points of interest, and chains of activities, you're going to need to provide jobs, right? So if you can create live-work circumstances, you can decrease the live-work commute distances, right? So if you look at this map here, right, these are the people, the average commute time is, around 30, 25 minutes or so in the U.S. For people. So that's an extended amount of drive. If you can lower their driving or create autonomous ways to get them to and from work, that's probably a much more stronger and less negative impactful approach. So what you want to do is kind of look at the communities and create districts out of them, and think about what jobs, services, and programs fit within each district. Okay, so maybe a good approach is to define some smaller kind of districts in the neighborhood you want, and then apply your program accordingly. But ultimately, if you do a lot of these things, you can decrease private car use. And what that's going to ultimately do is, again, that's going to decrease the greenhouse gas emissions, because they contribute to a majority of the GHGs right now. Okay, so you're creating try to create a carbon neutral setup. But if you're thinking about jobs, not just kind of the commute to and from jobs, but actual jobs themselves, you can have smaller scale local businesses tucked into new communities that aren't just giant manufacturing plants. Okay, so think about local businesses, local offices, and those kind of things, and create space for those and programs for those in your designs. Um, but what you want to think about doing that is not, let's try to think about ways to, especially where your site is, you want to discourage, one giant thing that has some jobs in it, like a, giant plant, but you want to try to increase the number of jobs per acre. So thinking about it like that, how many jobs can I get per acre on average? So I can tuck small scale and medium scale and place large scale focal point that are all different job creators, or job bringers into the economy. Okay. And you want to link all those new jobs to the transportation networks that you set up. So place them along, transportation hierarchy axes, or new kind of networks that you put in, bus routes, those kind of things, so people can utilize and get to and from work easily. And don't forget that mixed use allows for new jobs, but it also allows for housing and apartments and different offices, and like floors and floors of new jobs, and different varieties of new jobs. I'm sorry. So what you want to do is think about using mixed use as a way to increase jobs per acre, especially around your primary intersections. If you have areas that are abandoned, again, just like the kind of mall we saw in Colorado, this is just an old strip mall they turned into a public library. So allow for community needs to be reconfigured and put into these spaces, and revitalize these areas. One of the other things you need to think about, other than jobs, is actually providing a diversity of housing types. And I'm going to tell you why that helps communities. One is going to desegregate them by classes and income types and those kind of things. You allow multiple income levels to live in a singular neighborhood, and you start to diversify the population ethnicity type as well. And so, because if you isolate demographics and crime, I mean, basically, if you isolate income levels, you're going to get increases in crime in those same areas where lower income people are concentrated. So you separate them, you decrease crime, you increase diversity, and you're going to increase, you got to have different housing types to cater to those increases. So if you look at overall what we have in the U.S., residential land uses, singular regular residential land uses consume about 85% of all North American lands. That's a boatload of the North American land uses, and a lot of them are these single family kind of suburban sprawl type setups. So the way that they're set up now is that every house has to have sidewalks and driveways and rooftops and roadways connecting it, all these kind of things, right? So that's doing is making the Earth's surface increase exponentially because of all these impervious surfaces. So you're actually, if you develop like that, you're increasing the heat island effect globally and contributing to increases in temperature. So what they also do is that you're cutting out a lot of the locally owned businesses you can put in. And basically, if you spend your money, if you spend $100 at a locally owned business, three-quarters of that is going to stay in the local economy. But if you spend $100 at a non-locally owned business, uh, half of that basically is less than half of that's gonna remain in the local economy. So you basically you basically get a third more of the money to spend it in a local economy. So if you're not creating local economies and you're just putting in, only single family residential, you're losing those kind of things, right? And the infrastructure required for that type of single family development is increasing the greenhouse gas significantly. So if we design in these kind of nodes of development and more comprehensively, compact growth has been shown to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 5%, which is a pretty big chunk if you think about all the development that we have in the U.S. or globally, really. So if you're going to put in a diversity of housing types, right, you want to connect these houses to all the different jobs and specific functions and things that they're doing in the neighborhood to increase walkability. And you want to use street trees to help do that, right? So they allow for compact communities to increase ecological efficiency. So you have a compact community, which is decreasing the greenhouse gas emissions. And you have less infrastructure needed because it's all kind of in these denser nodes, and you're starting to put in these ecological pieces to help decrease the impervious surfaces. And over time, it just gets bigger and bigger. Plants grow, so ecological services increase. But the main thing, once you do all this stuff, is that you're not creating a monoculture of housing types. So various houses, varying housing types, they're more adaptable to change. And you say, why is that? Well, um, what happens is you're not catering to one income level. And if that income level gets hit by a recession, then the whole neighborhood's kaplunk, right? The whole neighborhood's abandoned. But if you have um, multiple housing types, then it can absorb the change or recessions or whatever a lot easier. And